right, so continuing from where we left off, this time I'm going to go beneath my adjusted values so that I'm still over in my data analysis. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in, scrolling down a little bit, I'm now in cell G20. I'm going to type in physical lengths. Because weight wasn't the only data that we collected the other day. Okay, so I'm going to do length, millimeters. And then I'm going to do height, millimeters. And then I'm going to do thickness, millimeters. Okay, I'm going to spread these out a little bit so that I can see them clearly. All right, so now I'm going to record my actual lengths. Now I measured it a good couple of times, so I'm going to go with, let's see, okay. And then my height I got as 7.68. Actually got the same values each time on that one. 7.65. A little bit of fluctuation in the second set. And that is most likely from two different individual note cards, because when I went through, I went and collected a lot of data. And so finally, my thickness, I gave us three different values. One, in fact, let's go ahead and mark it. The thickness of one card, and that was 0.20 in millimeters. And I actually have multiple measurements from these. I just gave you the averages, but in case you see them, we'll go ahead and do this. I'm just going to do T, because I know it's the thickness of 10. This is also in millimeters. This one is 1.65, 1.65, 1.65. I'm going to drag this over a little bit more. There we go. Finally, I'm going to do T20, also in millimeters. This one is 3.30, 3.30, and 3.25. Okay. So I'm going to come down to the bottom. Oops. I'm going to do my averages again. These are going to be in millimeters. All right. So you can use the f of x up there, like usual, or equals. Just make certain you spell it correctly. And now, since I'm doing the average of all of these, I'm just going to drag it straight across. And to be thorough, let's take a look at our standard deviation. Equals stdev. There we go. Okay. So now I've got that. I now have my average length, my average height, and the average thickness of 1, 10, and 20 cards. Okay. So now I'm going to find my volume that they take up in millimeter raised to the third power, cubed. Okay. That raised is the little caret that is on the number 6. Hold down shift and you'll get that. Okay? So, I'm going to go ahead and do the volume here. I'm going to do it underneath the thickness of 1, 10, and 20 so I can find the volume of 1 card, 10 cards, and 20 cards. So I'm going to do, my volume is my length times my height times my thickness. Okay? And for this, I could do it manually, but let's go ahead and do it this way. I want to make certain that when I drag it over, that I'm not losing my length or my height and picking up some weird thickness. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make these constant. Okay? With those little dollar signs like we did before. So when I drag this over, there we go. I've now got my volume in cubic meters, or cubic millimeters, I'm sorry. So now let's convert volume, parentheses, meters, cubed. because our usual way of dealing with the volume is in cubic meters. We also usually use kilograms, so we'll deal with that in just a moment. So now, if I find my volume, I'm going to say that it is equal to this value, okay? And when I draw out my unit conversions, like we've done before, we had talked about converting squared units. In this case, we're dealing with cubed units. So there are 1,000 millimeters in 1 meter. And so what I'm going to be dividing by, in this case, and draw it out on paper to make certain that you understand what I'm doing, but I'm going to be dividing by 1,000 cubed, which is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That should be right. And don't panic, it's coming up as a whole bunch of zeros. Like I said, Excel only shows you what it looks like pretty. It's not losing the information. So if I look at all of these right here, I want to, let's select J, 32, and then hold down Shift and click on the one on the other end. So I've got all of these selected. Let's right click, format cells, and make this where it's something a bit more useful. Most of the way down, we've got scientific notation to 2 decimal places. There we go. You can see it had the numbers with it the whole time, it just rounded them. Now using scientific notation, because we're dealing with exceedingly tiny numbers, it's a very small amount of space that these note cards take up compared to a cubic meter, which is actually pretty large. Okay, so this is my volume that they take up, which is great. Now I'm going to find my mass in kilograms of each of them, and I'm going to put it right underneath here. I'm going to have the mass of 1, since this is my column for 1 card, 10 cards, and 20 cards. Okay? So now I want my average mass for 1 card, which was up here. So I'm going to do equals, and then my average for 1 card is here. My computer's a little slow. My computer's a little very slow. There we go. Okay. So I did equals H12. So I clicked on that one because that's my average mass or weight for 1 card. Okay. Now I'm going to do the conversion from grams, which it's in, into kilograms. And to do that, I'm going to divide by 1,000. Okay? And then, let's see. The other ones are right next to it, so I should be fine just dragging that over. And just like before, I'm going to right-click, format cells, and tell it scientific notation so that I can actually see the numbers there. All right, so here comes the tricky part. I'm going to hit Control. Well, this isn't the tricky part. Control S to save, because we've done a lot of work. We don't want to lose it. I've got my volume in cubic meters. I've got my mass in kilograms. And so one of the final things I asked you was whether or not we could generate a graph based on this. So we're going to try and do a graph. So it's going to get tricky. We're going to come up here. Next to home, we're going to select Insert. And we've got a bunch of graph options here. In this case, most of the time, I use a scatter graph because I know how to use them. Okay? And it's going to ask you, how do you want it? This one's just kind of dots everywhere. This one's dots with lines kind of connecting them. These are squiggly lines with no dots. This is a straight line in between our dots. And then this is one with no dots. If you hover over it, it'll give you a small description. But you can kind of figure out what you're getting just by looking at the picture. And so I'm going to go with this. I want straight lines between my dots, and I like having dots. Okay, so when you select that, it will automatically try and generate a graph. Excel's not very good at predicting what I want, though. So I'm going to drag this over some so that we can see what we're looking at here. Like I said, this is where things get a little more confusing. All right, so what I'm going to do is now that I'm in my graph, I'm going to left-click on my data, the things that show up in here, they're the colored lines, and I'm going to right-click on that and go down to Select Data. Okay? And I'm going to click Edit. There's a button here marked Edit. This is something that I can actually do something with. So series name, this is going to be my mass versus volume, because that's the type of graph I want to make. So my x values, I want my volume along my x. So if I scoot over a little bit, here's my volume. I'm going to take it in cubic meters. So I'm going to select those. And then my y values, which go up along here, I want those to be my mass, which are right here. Click OK. All right, so that's my mass versus volume. Unfortunately, Excel's was like, I totally know what you want, dude. It's this. And Excel's wrong. So I'm going to select this guy and click remove. And he's gone. Good. And here is my graph. I can click on the legend right here and get rid of it. If I only have one data series, the legend doesn't give me that good of information. And so I have a small graph here. What I do with it, I'm going to leave to you. But this is our mass versus volume, and therefore it gives us some pretty good information about solving the final question about how heavy a filing cabinet full of these cards would be. See if you can figure that out. Okay? But if you have any questions about the graph, let me know. Remember, we got to it by going up to Insert, selecting Scatter Plot, and choosing what we wanted, and then fixing what it gave us by default. The older versions of Excel, the one that I'm used to, actually has you walk through and choose stuff beforehand. Okay? And there's one final thing. Page layout. Yes. So when you're trying to print these to make them look good, you can do a couple of things actually. Page layout is going to be useful. Let's go back to home real quick. I'm going to show you something that's actually very nice, and I like it if you use it, but I'm not going to require it for now. I'm going to come up here, and these are titles, and this is data beneath it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a line underneath these. Okay? Right up here, this is my border. It comes up by default with a thin black line underneath it. Let's go with a thick black line. So when I click the down arrow, it gives me a lot of other options. There's thick bottom border. So I'm going to select that one. And when I click off of it, you see, hey, now let's put a thick line underneath it. I'm going to do the same thing here. And it keeps whatever my last selection was, so I just click that button, and it puts it there. I'll go ahead and do that here. Cool. And this over here is the bottom of my data. Instead of putting a thick black line, I'm going to put, if I can find it, where's my small one? Yeah, bottom border. There, a thin one. And that lets me know that everything above this is stuff that I'm probably doing on math, or doing math on, and then beneath it, I've got things that are based on those numbers. And so down here, the same thing. I'm going to put a thick border on it. And you can see from all the options, like I could put a complete box around it, or all sorts of options. You can play around with those. I can also, if I want, for some reason or another, add color to cells. So I'll select this cell here. By default, it's on yellow, which is kind of not a great color. You can click the down arrow. Let's make that guy red. Cool. Instead, I'm just going to put them back as white, or alternatively, you can go with no fill. Okay? So that's just ways that you can kind of make things look a little bit better. You can also select all of them, right-click, go down to Format Cells, and the second tab is Alignment. I can wrap text around, I can merge cells, I can do all sorts of stuff with it. Horizontal, general, let's go with center. There we go, everything is centered. Not only text, but also numbers. The downside on this is, if you do that early, it's hard to tell if Excel sees this as just a number, or if it sees it as a number with some other letters. So it's hard to tell if you can do math on it or not. But this makes it look much nicer for when you print it off. The final thing that you can do, well, there are a couple things that you can do, but the next one that's useful is you can always copy this, select those cells, go to Copy, and you can take it over to a Word document. So in your lab report, you can do something like Data, and this is your data section. Paste it there, and there's your data table. Okay, the next part, if I want to do my data analysis, and I want to show it in here, I can do this, copy that, data analysis. You guys may not be able to see that because this is kind of zoomed out. But then I do paste, and it puts it right in there. And then finally, if you want to take your graph, you can also do that on the other part there. Just highlight it, copy and paste. So my graph, I'm going to copy. And then I'm going to paste. And my graph is in there. Then I can finish up with my conclusions or whatever else you need to type. And then when you print it off, it'll print as part of your lab report. That's pretty useful. The other thing that you can do is you can go in, and if I try and print this right now, let me see if I've got a print preview. I've got stuff kind of all over the place. Print preview. Oops, I'm selected on my graph. So I'm going to click out of my graph. So if I click on my graph itself, that's great. I can print my whole graph. So this is what my page will look like. Here's my raw data. Here's some of my data analysis. That doesn't help me much. Well, what I can do is I can highlight just this area. If I'm looking for just my raw data, I go up to Page Layout and Print Area. Set Print Area. That tells it, just pay attention to this area to print for me. So now if I go in and look at my print preview, I've only got that. Over here, if I want to do my data analysis, maybe it won't all fit on one page. Now I set my print area to that. I can also do orientation. By default, it's on portrait. I can also switch it to landscape. Okay, when I do that, it turns it on its side. And I've got plenty of room to put my stuff in. Okay? So, play around with that and make certain that you're putting in something that looks pretty good, because the easier it is to see, the easier it is for me to grade, and the more impressive it's going to look if anyone has to go through and look at your data. Okay? Because again, for some of you, this could be something that colleges are interested in. And finally, your graph, of course, you can always just left click on it, and you can do print preview, and it'll automatically blow that up to a graph size. Okay? So that is our overview on Excel.